If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. The Truth in My Days podcast is sponsored by the Truth in My Days ministry. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello all. As a reminder, this is a multi-part series. Today, we have Sonia interviewing John. We've been considering the claims of a skeptic that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We have seen that this is actually a reasonable standard, one that Jesus himself endorsed by saying in John 10:37, "If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me." He told us, in fact, that if one did not provide extraordinary evidence for his extraordinary claims, we should not believe him, and only Jesus provided such evidence for his claim to be sent by God with the true messenger of eternal life. We have seen, however, that some Christian apologists dispute this standard. One argument they make is that skeptics will not believe no matter the quality of evidence we offer. But we saw, both in Jesus' day and in modern times, some skeptics are convinced by the evidence. And now we continue our discussion.
Now, Price does suggest that we try a different tactic instead, expose their non-Christian worldview for the incoherent mess that it inevitably is. Now, I'm certainly a proponent of both offense and defense in apologetics. Indeed, we need to give compelling reasons to believe what we believe. But yes, at the same time, we need to press people to think through their own worldviews, to question why they believe what they believe, and is it really based on sufficient evidence? But the thing is, Price has said they have ways of looking at these things through their agnostic atheist glasses that render these things unremarkable or not extraordinary enough in their eyes. If they have agnostic atheist glasses to explain away our evidence, and obviously they have ways of explaining away their own incoherent mess, I would think. The reality is, look, if somebody is not at all interested in the truth, there's no evidence you can give to make them believe, but we don't know when we approach a person whether he is amenable to evidence or not.
So then his argument's a complete failure. But other apologists have different arguments against the dictum that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, don't they?
Yes. For example, the popular apologist Dr. Frank Turek, he says this, and I quote, "The claim extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence seems to me that the claim could be self-defeating. Why? Because it's an extraordinary claim itself, right? To say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence."
That doesn't follow. Why is that an extraordinary claim?
Well, it isn't. It absolutely is not. It's a reasonable claim. Evan Minton, writing for crossexamine.org, says this, "Any claim, whether they seem extraordinary or not, only requires sufficient evidence. The amount of proof or evidence needed to establish a fact only needs to be sufficient to warrant belief in it."
Yes, but what does sufficient mean? The more extraordinary your claim is, the more evidence is going to be needed to be sufficient evidence.
Yeah, so it seems that Minton is actually backing up what we say. When he says all that's necessary is sufficient evidence, what's sufficient? For an ordinary claim, like what I ate for breakfast, self-reporting is sufficient. For the claim that I won an Olympic medal, that's not sufficient. For a claim that I'm a secretly superhero, we need still more evidence. So whatever is sufficient, whatever the bar for that is, goes up based on how extraordinary the claim is. And so even by Minton's standards here, what is sufficient for extraordinary claim is extraordinary evidence. And then there's William Lane Craig's attempt. Let's listen to him on this.
This person's, asking a question. A person rising from the dead would be extraordinary. they say. Wouldn't extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? Would you like to respond to Fish?
Oh boy, I could go on at length about this one.
A couple of minutes.
That aphorism, which is beloved in the free thought community, extraordinary events require extraordinary evidence, is in fact demonstrably false. It is demonstrably false. It fails to understand all of the factors that play into assessing the probability of an event. If that were true, we could never have adequate evidence for extraordinarily improbable events. For example, a pick in last night's lottery, against which the odds are millions to one. The evidence for the reliability of the evening news would never be able to swamp, or it would be swamped rather, by the improbability of the event reported, so that we would never be able to believe the report on the evening news that that number was actually picked. So this would lead to skepticism concerning non-supernatural but highly improbable events. What probability theorists came to understand is that you also need to consider how likely would the evidence be if the event had not occurred. In other words, how likely is it the evening news would announce just that number if that weren't the number that was picked? And if that probability is sufficiently low, it can counterbalance any intrinsic improbability in the number itself. And so when you apply this to the resurrection, what that means is you need to consider how probable would the empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in the resurrection be if the resurrection had not occurred. And I think you would agree that if there were no resurrection, those facts would be enormously improbable. Whereas, by contrast, if the resurrection occurred, they would be very probable. So, in fact, you don't really need to have extraordinary evidence to establish extraordinary claims. You just need to show that the evidence is more probable on the hypothesis than it would be on the denial of the hypothesis. And all of this is explained in greater detail in my book, Reasonable Faith, in the chapter on the resurrection.
What do you think?
So is what he's trying to say that since the resurrection did happen, that means it's no longer an extraordinary event, so we don't need the extraordinary evidence?
No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that, well, first he's saying that it's not. He's saying that it's not true, easy to disprove, in fact, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The first he says, well, look, what about probability? The chance of any particular combination of numbers coming up to win a lottery is very, very improbable, and yet newspapers report it. By the standards of extraordinary evidence, claims require extraordinary evidence. We should never believe that a particular ticket won the lottery. That's what he's saying.
Please note that this is a multi-part series. If you have missed any episodes and would like to listen to them, they will all be available on our YouTube channel and on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. You can find the links to these on our website, truthinmydays.com, or you can look for Truth in My Days on YouTube as one word.
Well, I don't think that's really a fair comparison with the resurrection, because in the case of a lottery, even if the chance of that particular ticket winning is small, there is a ticket that won. Somebody's had to win, but it's not like you had to have somebody rise from the dead.
Yes, that's definitely the case. Any lottery number combination is very unlikely, but in probability, you have to look at the probability of one number coming up multiplied by the number of attempts. If you're rolling a die, for example, there's a 1 in 6 chance that any given number on it, say 5, would come up. But if you roll it 6 times, chances are that any of the numbers would come up once. If the odds against a particular number winning a lottery is 1 in a million, and you sell 1 million tickets, then odds are that one of them is going to be a winner. So it's actually not unlikely. But there are more fundamental problems with what he says. 5, in fact, I count. First, Craig says you don't really need to have extraordinary evidence to establish extraordinary claims. You just need to show that the evidence is more probable on the hypothesis than it would be on the denial of the hypothesis. Do you understand what he means by that?
So like more likely than not.
Yeah, see, he's saying that, well, in the case of, say, the resurrection, it may be intrinsically improbable. But then you look at the eyewitnesses saying that they saw the risen Jesus. You look at the empty tomb. You look at the changed lives of the disciples. How those would be very, very unlikely unless he did rise. So he's saying that if you can show those things are more improbable than Jesus rising from the dead, then we should believe it. And it's not really extraordinary at all.
But doesn't that form part of the extraordinary evidence?
Well, not exactly. The first problem with what he's saying is that any claim anybody makes is more likely, unless you can show some kind of deceptive motive, any claim is more likely to be made if it really happened than if it didn't happen. Yeah, I'm more likely to say that I saw a Mercedes-Benz drive in front of my house than I am to say that I saw an elephant run before my house. But am I more likely to say I saw an elephant run in front of my house if I did see it or if I didn't see it? By William Lane Craig's assumptions, it's always more likely that I would say it because I saw it. There's 100% chance I would say it if I saw it. 0% chance I'd say it if I didn't see it.
So then anything you say is true by his kind of
Yeah,
reasoning.
by that standard, we should believe any claim, because a claim is always more likely to be said if the event happened than if it didn't. Yes, we should believe Jesus, but we should also believe Muhammad, we should also believe Joseph Smith, but we can't do that. And then it also completely leaves out the intrinsic probability of the event itself, because he's just talking about, it's more likely that I would make the claim if it happened than if it didn't. But how does that compare to the intrinsic probability of that event, of an elephant running in front of my house?
Can you even apply probability principles to historical events like that?
No, you can't, and we did do a program on this, but we'll get to that one. We'll build up to it. The second problem is, how could you ever do that? You can say, well, it's very unlikely that these claims would be made if they didn't happen. But you have to show that that's more unlikely than the unlikelihood of the event happening. How do you do that? How can you show that? If they're both unlikely, how do you show that the probability of one is lower than the probability of the other? How do you calculate actual numbers?
I don't think you can.
No, you can't. That's the thing. And that's the third problem here. And as I said, we've discussed in detail in other series, probability applies to random events such as flipping a coin or rolling a dice. It applies, we have a fixed number of possible outcomes, and then you divide that number, the number of desired outcomes, by the possible outcomes, and that's your probability. It's an actual number. When you flip a coin, you have a 1 in 2 chance of getting heads because there's one head and one tail on the coin, and equally likely that either one would come up. If you get 2 heads in a row, the chance is 1 in 4. Because when you flip a coin twice, there are now 4 possible outcomes. Head, tail, head, tail, head, tail, tail. And only one of those is 2 heads in a row. Same thing, you roll a die, and your odds of any one number is 1 in 6.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part, same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. If you like our content, please share this information with family and friends. It helps us a lot. We also would love to hear from you. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching Truth in My Days as one word again. Truth in My Days as one word. No spaces in between. Or reach us by email at info@truthinmydays.com. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.